Right now, as you watch this, there is a metabolic crisis unfolding inside millions of people who feel completely fine, who got a clean bill of health at their last checkup, and who have no idea that their body has been sending distress signals for years. We are talking about prediabetes and insulin resistance, a condition so widespread, so underdiagnosed, and so deeply misunderstood that it has become the defining health emergency of our time. The statistics alone should stop you in your tracks. Estimates suggest that somewhere around 96 million adults in the United States alone are currently in the pre-diabetic range. And when you factor in the people who are trending in that direction without yet crossing the official threshold, you are looking at the majority of the adult population carrying some degree of impaired glucose metabolism. Most of them will never hear a word about it from their doctor, not because their doctor doesn't care, but because the standard tests we rely on are simply not designed to catch this problem early. They're designed to catch it late. And late, in the context of insulin resistance, means after years of quiet damage have already been done to your blood vessels, your kidneys, your nerves, your eyes, and your heart. That is exactly what we are going to change today. By the end of this video, you will understand the 10 warning signs that your body sends long before any official diagnosis, why the most commonly ordered blood test misses the problem almost entirely, and what you can start doing right now to get ahead of this thing before it gets ahead of you. Let's start by building a foundation, because to understand the warning signs, you first need to understand what insulin resistance actually is and why it develops so gradually that most people don't feel it happening. Your body runs primarily on glucose, a simple sugar derived from the foods you eat, particularly carbohydrates. Every time you eat, glucose enters your bloodstream, and your pancreas releases a hormone called insulin, whose job is to act as a key, unlocking the doors of your cells so that glucose can enter and be used for energy. That system, when it works well, is elegant and efficient. But here is what happens when it breaks down. Over time, if your cells are exposed to too much insulin too frequently, which happens when your diet is consistently high in refined carbohydrates and sugars, they begin to respond less and less to insulin's signal. They become resistant. The key stops fitting the lock as smoothly, so your pancreas compensates by producing more insulin, trying harder to get the same result. For a long time, this compensation works. Your blood glucose stays in a normal range. Your annual checkup comes back fine. But behind the scenes, your insulin levels are climbing steadily, and that elevated insulin is doing real damage throughout your body, promoting fat storage, driving inflammation, taxing your kidneys, and disrupting the function of dozens of other hormonal systems. This is the hidden phase of insulin resistance, and it can last for a decade or more before blood sugar finally rises enough to trigger an official prediabetes or diabetes diagnosis. By the time that diagnosis arrives, you haven't just developed insulin resistance. You've had it for years. The measurement that most accurately tracks this entire spectrum is the hemoglobin A1C. Here is how it works. Your red blood cells live for approximately 3 to 4 months before being replaced. During their lifespan, a certain percentage of them become coated with glucose from your bloodstream. The more glucose circulating over that period, the higher that percentage. By measuring it, we get a reliable average of your blood sugar over 3 to 4 months, which is far more informative than a single snapshot glucose reading taken on any given morning. Officially, an A1C below 5.7 is classified as normal. Between 5.7 and 6.4 falls in the prediabetes range. At 6.5 and above, the diagnosis becomes type 2 diabetes. But here is something your doctor's report won't tell you. The truly optimal zone, where your metabolic machinery is running cleanly and efficiently with minimal long-term risk, is below about 5.3. Someone sitting at 5.5 or 5.6 is technically normal on paper, but their trajectory may already be pointing in the wrong direction. Understanding this continuum, rather than thinking in terms of a binary healthy versus sick cutoff, is the shift in perspective that allows you to catch and reverse this process at its earliest and most treatable stage. Warning sign number 1: elevated fasting insulin. This is the earliest detectable marker of insulin resistance, and it is almost never included in a standard blood panel. When your doctor orders routine labs, they measure your fasting glucose, the amount of sugar in your blood after an overnight fast. What they almost never measure is the amount of insulin your body had to produce to keep that glucose in the normal range. That distinction is everything. In the early stages of insulin resistance, fasting glucose can appear completely normal, let's say 88 milligrams per deciliter, well within range, while fasting insulin is already 2, 3, or even 4 times higher than it should be. Your body has quietly escalated its insulin output to compensate for your cells' growing resistance, and the glucose number stays normal precisely because of that escalation. The effort required to maintain balance has gone up dramatically, but the test that measures balance rather than effort will never show it. A genuinely healthy fasting insulin sits somewhere in the range of 3 to 6 microunits per milliliter. Many laboratory reference ranges mark anything below 25 as normal, which means clinically significant insulin resistance can exist for years without triggering any concern from a standard lab report. If you have never had your fasting insulin measured, that is the single most impactful test you can ask for at your next appointment. Warning sign number 2: energy crashes after meals. There is a specific kind of fatigue that belongs to insulin resistance, and it's different from being generally tired. It arrives predictably after eating, particularly after meals built around bread, pasta, rice, potatoes, or anything sweet. You eat, and within 30 to 90 minutes, you feel as though someone has drained the power from your body. Your eyes want to close. Your thinking becomes slow and foggy. You need to sit down or lie down, and simple tasks feel genuinely difficult. Most people assume this is normal. It isn't. When your metabolic system is functioning well, a meal should provide energy. The glucose from your food should enter your cells efficiently and be converted into fuel. What happens instead in insulin resistance is that your cells are not responding efficiently to insulin's signal. So glucose builds up in the bloodstream and cannot easily get to where it needs to go. Your body then urgently works to resolve this, converting the excess glucose into triglycerides to be stored. And that conversion process itself consumes energy. You ate a meal and spent energy rather than gaining it. That post-meal crash is your body's way of telling you that its carbohydrate processing system is under significant strain. If this happens to you regularly, it is not a personality trait or a midday slump. It is a metabolic signal worth paying close attention to. Warning sign number 3: cuts and wounds that heal slowly. Your body's ability to repair damaged tissue depends on a rapid, well-coordinated delivery of blood, oxygen, immune cells, and repair proteins to the site of injury. That delivery system relies entirely on healthy, unobstructed circulation through your smallest blood vessels, the capillaries and microvessels that reach every corner of your tissue. When blood glucose is chronically elevated, even in the modest range associated with prediabetes, these tiny vessels experience ongoing inflammation and swelling. The flow through them slows. Healing resources that should arrive quickly are delayed. A cut that should close in a few days lingers for a week or 2. A bruise that should fade within a week persists for 3. People often write this off as getting older or attribute it to being on blood thinners, or simply don't notice because the change is gradual. But impaired wound healing is a measurable consequence of microvascular dysfunction, and microvascular dysfunction is one of the earliest physical changes associated with chronic glucose overload. Pay attention to how your body heals. It is telling you something about the health of your circulation. Warning sign number 4. Tingling, numbness, or strange sensations in the extremities. Most people associate nerve damage with advanced diabetes, the kind of severe neuropathy that results in complete loss of sensation. But the process that leads there begins far earlier, and in its early stages, it feels far less dramatic. You might notice occasional tingling in your feet when you haven't been sitting awkwardly. A mild pins and needles sensation that fades after a few minutes. Intermittent numbness in your toes or fingers, particularly in the morning or at rest. A subtle burning sensation that comes and goes. Your peripheral nerves, the ones that extend from your spinal cord into your arms, hands, legs, and feet, are nourished by an extremely fine network of capillaries. When those capillaries are compromised by the same microvascular inflammation we just discussed, the nerves themselves begin to receive inadequate oxygen and nutrients. They respond with these early warning sensations. This is peripheral neuropathy in its earliest form, and at this stage, it is reversible. The key is recognizing it for what it is, rather than dismissing it as tiredness, bad circulation in the general sense, or just an odd thing that sometimes happens. Warning sign number 5. Subtle kidney changes showing up in lab work. Your kidneys are arguably the most microvessel-dense organs in your entire body. They filter your blood through an astonishing network of tiny tubules and capillaries, approximately 1 million per kidney, and their proper function depends entirely on the integrity of those vessels. When chronic glucose elevation begins to inflame and damage this network, the filtration membranes start to become leaky. Proteins that should be retained in the bloodstream begin to spill into the urine in small but measurable amounts. This is called microalbuminuria, and it can be detected with a simple urine test long before any other kidney symptom appears. No pain, no obvious changes, no dramatic warning. Just a number on a lab report that most people never get and would not know to ask for. Dr. Ashley Monroe has emphasized in her clinical work that microalbuminuria is one of the most actionable early markers available, because at the stage when these changes first appear, dietary and lifestyle interventions can genuinely reverse the damage. The same cannot be said once kidney disease has progressed further. If you have any reason to believe you might be on the insulin resistance spectrum, ask your doctor to include a urine microalbumin test in your next workup. It is inexpensive, non-invasive, and could be one of the most important numbers you ever see. Warning sign number 6. Blurred vision or fluctuating visual clarity. Your eye contains 2 distinct optical components: the lens at the front, which focuses incoming light, and the retina at the back, which is the light-sensitive tissue that actually converts that light into the neural signals your brain interprets as vision. Retinopathy, the eye condition most closely associated with blood sugar dysregulation, involves the retina, not the lens, and it begins with changes to the microscopic blood vessels that supply it. In its earliest stage, before any vision loss is detectable on a standard eye exam, these vessels may show subtle swelling and leakage. The result, experientially, can be vision that fluctuates throughout the day, clearer in the morning, slightly blurrier by afternoon, or varying between eyes in ways that seem inconsistent. Many people chase this symptom with new glasses prescriptions that don't quite resolve the problem, without ever identifying the metabolic root cause. If your vision seems inconsistent in ways that corrective lenses haven't fully fixed, and particularly if you notice the changes correlating with how you've been eating, that connection deserves attention. Your retina is giving you a window into the health of your smallest blood vessels throughout your body. Warning sign number 7, persistent joint pain and unexplained inflammation. The standard explanation for joint pain in people who are carrying extra weight is a mechanical one. More weight equals more pressure on joints equals more pain. That explanation feels intuitive and it contains a grain of truth, but it misses the far more important biochemical reality. Insulin resistance drives systemic inflammation. When insulin levels are chronically elevated, they activate a cascade of pro-inflammatory signaling molecules, cytokines in particular, that circulate throughout the body and settle preferentially into tissues that are already under stress. Joints are high on that list. The inflammation that accumulates in joint tissue contributes to cartilage breakdown and pain regardless of body weight, which is why lean individuals with insulin resistance can experience significant joint problems, and why people who lose weight through calorie restriction alone often find their joint pain persisting even after substantial weight loss. Addressing the inflammation at its source by reducing the insulin response through dietary changes tends to produce improvements in joint pain that no anti-inflammatory medication can replicate over the long term. If your joints have been a consistent source of discomfort, knees, hips, lower back, wrists, and particularly if the pain seems disproportionate to any specific injury or structural cause, metabolic inflammation deserves to be on your list of suspects. Warning sign number 8, increasing difficulty managing weight, despite consistent effort. One of the most demoralizing experiences in modern health culture is eating carefully, exercising regularly, and still watching the scale refuse to move, or watching it creep in the wrong direction. If this describes your experience, insulin resistance may be the reason. Insulin is your body's primary storage hormone. When it is elevated, your fat cells receive a constant biochemical instruction to hold on to their contents. Your body's preferred fuel source becomes glucose rather than stored fat, which means fat mobilization is effectively suppressed. You can create a caloric deficit, do everything the conventional weight loss advice recommends, and still find your body stubbornly resistant to letting go of its reserves, because the hormonal environment is overriding the arithmetic. This is not a failure of willpower or discipline. It is a physiological consequence of chronically elevated insulin, and it cannot be solved by trying harder at the same approach. Understanding this is essential not only for weight management, but for your relationship with your own body. The weight gain associated with insulin resistance also tends to concentrate around the abdomen, particularly the deep visceral fat that surrounds the organs, rather than distributing evenly, and that abdominal accumulation is itself both a symptom and a driver of worsening insulin resistance, creating a self-reinforcing cycle that becomes increasingly difficult to break the longer it continues. Warning sign number 9, relentless hunger and cravings that don't respond to eating. This is perhaps the most psychologically confusing symptom on this entire list, because it seems to contradict itself. You are eating regularly. You may be eating more than you used to. You might even be gaining weight, and yet you are hungry, persistently, sometimes urgently hungry, in a way that feels disconnected from how much you have actually consumed. The explanation for this lies in the difference between having energy stored and having energy available. When insulin resistance is present, the elevated insulin in your system keeps your fat cells locked in storage mode. Even though you have substantial energy reserves held in your body fat, your cells cannot efficiently access those reserves. From your brain's perspective, you are running short on available fuel, and it responds accordingly with hunger signals and cravings, particularly for fast-burning carbohydrates that can quickly restore glucose availability. Eating those carbohydrates temporarily resolves the hunger, but it also triggers another insulin spike, which deepens the storage lock, which leads to more hunger again more quickly. This cycle, often mistaken for emotional eating, poor self-discipline, or food addiction, is metabolic in origin. It is driven by insulin dysregulation, and it responds dramatically to the dietary interventions that address the root cause. Understanding this frees people from enormous amounts of self-blame and opens the door to strategies that actually work. Warning sign number 10, rising blood pressure and elevated triglycerides. These two markers are so frequently found together in people with insulin resistance that their co-occurrence should be treated as a significant red flag, even when either one alone would not be cause for alarm. Here is why they are linked. When insulin levels are chronically elevated, the kidneys are prompted to retain more sodium. Sodium retention increases fluid volume in the bloodstream, and increased fluid volume raises blood pressure. Simultaneously, the liver, responding to the excess glucose that your resistant cells cannot absorb, ramps up its production of triglycerides, packaging that glucose into fat particles and releasing them into circulation. Blood pressure nudges upward. Triglycerides climb. Both of these are typically treated as separate risk factors, each with their own medications, their own guidelines, their own specialists. But in a very large proportion of cases, they share a single root cause, and addressing that root cause, lowering chronic insulin exposure through dietary change, can normalize both simultaneously without medication. If your last blood panel showed triglycerides above 100 and blood pressure trending toward the 130s over 80s, and particularly if those numbers have been gradually worsening over a period of years, the metabolic picture they paint together deserves more attention than either number receives on its own. Now let's talk about what to do with all of this, because information without a path forward is just anxiety. The first and most important action is to get the right tests. Specifically, ask your doctor for a fasting insulin level alongside your regular fasting glucose and A1C. Ask for a lipid panel that includes triglycerides separately from total cholesterol, and ask for a urine microalbumin test. These four measurements together, fasting insulin, A1C, triglycerides, and microalbumin, will give you a dramatically more complete picture of your metabolic health than the standard annual panel most people receive. If your doctor is unfamiliar with fasting insulin testing or dismisses it as unnecessary, it is entirely reasonable to request it anyway or seek a second opinion. You are not asking for anything exotic or experimental. You are asking for a test that directly measures the hormone at the center of this entire issue. The earlier you know your numbers, the more options you have, and the more reversible this whole process becomes. The second action, and the one that produces the most meaningful long-term change, is addressing your diet in a way that specifically targets insulin exposure rather than just calories or fat intake. The foods that drive the most significant insulin responses are refined carbohydrates, white bread, white rice, pasta, pastries, sweetened beverages, packaged snack foods, and anything built primarily from processed flour or added sugar. Reducing these foods, not necessarily eliminating all carbohydrates, but meaningfully reducing the refined and processed ones, allows your insulin levels to come down, your cells to gradually restore their sensitivity, and the whole downstream cascade of effects we have discussed today to begin reversing. This happens relatively quickly in many people. Blood pressure improvements can appear within weeks. Triglycerides can normalize within a month or two. Energy levels, hunger regulation, and sleep quality often improve noticeably within the first few weeks. The body wants to heal. Given the right conditions, it will. Everything we have covered today, the 10 warning signs, the inadequacy of standard testing, the role of insulin rather than glucose as the true early marker, points toward one conclusion. The most powerful time to act on insulin resistance is before your doctor tells you that you have it. The tools to recognize it early are available to you right now. Use them. Share this video with someone you care about who needs to hear this message. And if you are ready to go deeper on exactly which foods to eat, which to avoid, and how to structure your approach to reverse insulin resistance naturally, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell because that video is coming and you do not want to miss it.